Over my years of guiding and outfitting, I had several times where a hunter or guide made an honest mistake that resulted in a pretty substantial game violation. I made this video to help you, regardless if you're a beginner or expert hunter, avoid those same mistakes in the future. Usually when this would happen, the night afterwards, we'd all be sitting down at the lodge, eating dinner, and it's this undercurrent of, do we talk about it? Do we not talk about it? But usually by mid-dinner, we were openly discussing what happened that day, the mistake that happened and the game violation that happened. Almost without exception, there would be another experienced hunter at that table that would open up and tell a story about making the same mistake with essentially the same variables involved. That tells me that these mistakes are avoidable, and one of the ways to avoid them is to talk about them and talk about what commonly leads up to them. And on that note, if you're a viewer out there and I don't cover just an honest mistake game violation in this video that you've dealt with, or you've dealt with one of these violations I talk about, please mention it in the comment and give the story. Sure, if you don't want to say it was you, just make it up and say it was somebody else, but please share the story because it's very valuable to people. Unfortunately, these mistakes, and they may be honest, but they're still mistakes, these same mistakes happen to people over and over, and the consequences suck. One of the most common game violations that I dealt with as a guide, and it's a big one, is one that almost nobody believes is so common. I'm going to save that one for the end because there's a lot of tactical advice in that one that I want you guys to hear. So how I have this structure is I'm going to tell you the game violation, I'll tell you the mistakes that led up to it, and then I'll give you some advice on how you can avoid it. The first one is wasting game meat, wanton waste, failure to follow up on a shot, failure to put an effort out to recover a game animal. Okay, so there's two ways that I saw this scenario go down. The first one is the scarier one, and it's also the one that's easiest to avoid. Several times when I was up in the mountains, I actually ran into a freshly killed game animal, and I would be like, oh wow, like somebody just killed this animal. And I was expecting someone to arrive in short order, right? The animal was fatally wounded. It doesn't look like it traveled very far. The hunter has to be around here somewhere, and then nobody shows up. I'd backtrack the trail of the animal, and I would find hunters, and I would start talking to them, and they would say, oh, hey, we just missed the bull. And of course, my reaction would be like, no, you didn't. The bull is dead right there. And I had this same situation where I would go into a camp, and hunters would say, hey, we just missed the bull right over there, but we know we clean missed it. And then I would always follow up. Did you go check? Did you make sure there's no blood? Did you look around for the animal? Did you make sure you didn't miss it? And a lot of times people react and like, no, we saw a miss. We saw the snow blow up. We saw a tree hit. There's no way we hit it. I can tell you there were several times where we went and followed up, and sure enough, we found a dead game animal. And this goes for rifle and archery. So I can already hear people that are watching this video, they're going, oh, how would that ever happen? Well, let's dive in because it happens more often than you think. But a lot of times these individuals, they're actually being fairly rational because they're taking in variables out there and deciding, hey, like we for sure missed it based on what we saw, right? Well, a lot of times in these hunting situations, you have to dive deeper. So if you see an indicator like a shot splash, a branch get blown up, snow blow up, first, a lot of times when bullets hit bone or something hard, they fragment. So you can see splashes around, right? You might have picked up a tree that was 3 feet above the bull and you saw something hit it, right? But that was a bone fragment or a piece of the bullet that fragmented off and caused that. The other thing is angle, and this can happen a lot in snow. If you're shooting down, the splash of the snow, it can look like it's below the animal when it's actually right behind them and it was a clear pass through. Or if you're shooting up, you can see the splash somewhere else. Those splashes are fairly misleading. So splashes in dirt, splashes in snow, just realize that where you think it hit is not necessarily where the bullet hit. Don't rely on the animal didn't look hit, particularly on the larger big game animals like elk. I cannot tell you how many elk I've watched, you know, clearly through a spotter as a hunter shot them, and I could not tell with certainty if the bull was hit or not. They're just so big and strong, the animal can walk off as if it had not been hit, so don't ever rely on that variable. And with that, there's a similar situation. If you're the hunter, you're the shooter, and then you have a good, reliable spotter with you, a friend or a guide or whatever, and they're watching the animal and they're calling the shot for you, if you shoot and they call a miss, first there's the scenario that I just told you. It could be that they're seeing a splash or some other indicator that's kind of a false reality. The other big one on this front is they could actually be looking at a different animal. There's a lot of scenarios with the limited field of view of your scope and the limited field of view of the spotter where you can end up looking at two different animals, right? Sure, you've discussed it and you both think you're looking at the same animal, but that doesn't always mean that you are. So it's important to consider that. Did he just call a miss on an animal that I wasn't shooting at? Regardless of how far you think you missed the animal, if you pulled the trigger, go make sure you did not wound the animal. And that leads us to the second common way this scenario arises, and that's that you do follow up on the shot, but you can't find blood. So after a solid effort, you don't find blood in the area, you don't find the arrow, so you can't check to see if there's blood on the arrow. There's no physical evidence that you wounded the animal. A lot of folks will give up at that point and call it a clean miss. This can get a little tricky because you are doing what's prudent and you're doing the right thing by following up on the shot, and you don't have any sign that you did hit it, so you move on, right? Again, I've seen it in several situations where people did this, and then it turns out where they were searching for blood, just 50 yards away, there was a stone cold dead game animal. So first there's just the practical aspect that depending on the angle, where the animal was hit, the species of animal, the direction it went, the speed, all of those different variables, you may not find blood for the first 30 or 40, 50, 60 yards of blood trailing. That's not that uncommon. Spring bears in particular with their long hides are like that. In the fall they can be like that a little bit too. Elk, if you hit them at a certain angle, particularly when archery hunting where you think you're going to see a lot of blood, if you hit them at a certain angle, there might be 30, 40, 50 yards of no blood. So there's all those different scenarios. Extend your search, right? When you shoot at the animal yourself or your spotter or whoever, try to watch where the animal goes so you can get to that trail. You can just follow the dry trail of the animal, right? The bloodless trail of the animal, because if you get on the right trail and you go 100 yards, you might find the blood out there 60, 70 yards, and you'll be very happy that you just watched where that animal went and you kind of did that dry blood trailing, was what I call that. That can solve this issue, and it can give you more confidence that you truly did not hit the animal. So here's a tricky scenario that I've had happen to myself when I'm guiding, and it happens a lot easier than you think. Usually it's in real rough terrain, right? And you're shooting across a tight canyon, and it's so rough that you're finding just a difficult spot to sit, right? And you're watching the animal, and the animal's in rough country too. So you take the shot. The first thing to do before all the excitement prevails is mark the exact spot where you shot and visually look at where that animal is. Make sure you get a very clear picture of where that animal is when you shot. Take a picture of exactly where you're sitting, where the animal went. It went by that tree. A lot of times excitement will prevail and you'll get up and maybe you'll walk a little bit to get another different angle at the animal, to get a second shot. Maybe you're just excited and you want to get over there, so you start maneuvering. And what happens is your brain starts to play tricks on you. You're looking over, you periodically look over and you think it's that tree, you think it's that tree. Yeah, you know the animal is standing at that tree. And then you get over there and oh yeah, this is exactly where the animal was when I took the shot. This is where it is. And then you grid and you search and you look in depth in that 50, 60, 70, 100-yard grid. You just go like mad and no blood. I must have missed. But what actually happened is the animal was standing at a tree that was 150 yards away, or a rock that was 200 yards away from where you're looking. You've just misjudged where the animal is. And a lot of times we suspect this because we're just uncertain. We don't have that much certainty, like, oh man, like now I'm over here, I don't know exactly where the animal was when I shot. And the first thing we'll do in that scenario is we'll go back to where we think we shot from and then re-look at the picture. And now look, where was the animal when I shot? If you don't have a picture of that in the first time, your brain can still kind of play tricks on you. You can get back to the spot and be like, I think, yeah, he was at that rock. Wasn't he at that rock? Yeah. Oh, no, I think he was at that one. Nah, dude, I think he was at that one. So you can have these debates and it can all get squirrely. It's always best to do it right in the moment. And the one trick there is, yes, sometimes as the animal moves and you think he's wounded, you've got to get a different angle. So you move on the angle and now you shoot at him again. Those scenarios can just be a lot of anxiety and adrenaline going anyways. You're even more likely to not remember exactly how it's going. So you have to take a breath after things calm down and get a good sight picture of what's going on, and you'll avoid this situation where you go start looking for blood somewhere that's actually very distant from where the animal is. Even though I just said that a lot of animals won't bleed for the first 30, 40, 60, 70, or 80 yards, the honest statement there is that a lot of animals won't bleed outside of right there at the impact shot. The majority of animals, if you get right where they were standing when they were hit, there will be blood there. If you look, it might be very minimal, but there will be blood there. But then there'll be a big gap in blood trail, right? But if you can get right where they are standing, typically you're gonna find some impact blood. And here's a trick that might make you look like a superstar game tracker. If you've got folks that you're hunting with and they come back to camp and they're like, hey, we're pretty sure we wounded this elk, but we just cannot find blood. Will you come out and help us look? When you go back with them to the spot where they took the shot and where they think the animal is, what I recommend is listen to how they describe this scenario. Don't necessarily focus on their certainty of locations. A lot of times, an outsider who just hears a description of the situation, when they show up there to help track, they'll be the one that picks up blood. This is particularly the case if it's been 2 or 3 hours into this and the first group of hunters have been really struggling at it. A lot of times that frustration, they just keep repeating the same path on the mountain. They're like, I knew it was here. I knew it was here when I shot. But a fresh mind comes to it. Okay, well, if they were over on that side and they got a nice broadside shot at this elk, that elk couldn't have been standing here. Maybe it was standing over here between the trees where there's a clear spot. And then they look down, and even though they're standing 150 yards from the other guys who've been looking for 3 or 4 hours, they look down and sure enough, they find blood. And of course, the whole group will be like, holy shit, how did you find it? You're like a master tracker. But the reality is, it's just a fresh mindset, and you're not biased by the certainty that's kind of manifested itself over the frustrating time that the first shooter and whoever was with him have been spending kind of just figuring out and getting frustrated the fact they can't find blood. The last general tip I'll give you on this one that will help you avoid this situation is this. Right after the shot, there should be one question asked. How did it feel? How did that shot feel? Either ask that to yourself if you're the shooter, or if you're an observer, guide, whatever, ask the hunter that. How did it feel? Never discount what they say. A lot of beginner hunters have so much anxiety and nerves, they don't want to be real clear and be like, no, it was a hit, like that felt good. So they might say, man, it felt good. My rest felt good. Everything felt good. There wasn't a whole lot of movement. It felt good. And then a more experienced hunter a lot of time would be like, it felt real. It felt solid. I don't know how I could have missed. If those are the reactions, don't discount it. There's information there. I've had situations where I'm sitting in a kitchen tent eating lunch. A guide comes in with his hunter and they're talking about a shot opportunity. And the guide at lunch, this might be 2 or 3 hours after the morning hunt where the shot took place. The guide asks like, well, how did you feel about it? Like, how did it feel? And the hunter responds, man, it felt good. I had a good rest. It felt like a solid shot. I can see a twinkle in the guide's eye, and that guide is thinking in his mind, like, we got to go back and check again. Basically, the rule that I use, if I felt like I've put out a very prudent effort, fair effort to find blood, but the hunter tells me like, man, I just don't see how I could have missed the animal, I'll essentially double the time. I feel like that information is that valuable. The last thing I'll say about meat waste or failure to pursue, different states and different countries have different rules on this. So just make sure you understand them. In Colorado, it's all 4 quarters, back straps, tenderloins. You don't have to take out organ meat. You don't have to take out neck. You don't have to take out the ribs. Other places that is different, so make sure you follow those rules. Obviously, those are objective rules. They're defined, so you can go read them, but there's kind of this subjective nature of them. I mean, to me, the heart of an animal is just as valuable as one of the tenderloins, but it's just the rules. All right, folks, so the big one, and unfortunately one of the most common ones that I ran into, and that's one hunter accidentally shooting 2 animals. I know the second I said that, there's people out there just scoffing at the idea that that could happen, but it's a lot more common than you think. And it tends to be related to the first violation I mentioned, people just not knowing when they hit animals. This tends to happen with elk a lot, and obviously that's because elk don't show hits as well as a lot of other game animals. But there's a few variables that make the chances of this happening go way up, and those are multiple shooters, groups of elk, and elk that can't get away real quickly. So a lot of times that equates to elk that are in snow, bachelor groups of bulls after the rut, and late season cow hunts. 2 ways this usually happens. The first way is that you get a good shot opportunity on an animal, you shoot, the shot is called as a miss, the animal moves, and then you shoot at another animal, or you shoot at the same animal, or at least you thought it was the same animal, but it's actually a different animal, right? And I've seen both those scenarios. You shoot at an animal, it gets called as a miss, so you feel okay shooting at a different animal, but it turns out you hit the first animal. So now you've inadvertently harvested 2 game animals. The second scenario is I've seen people shoot, either wound or clean miss the animal. The animal gets up, starts moving. They believe they're shooting at the same animal again. They shoot, they hit the animal, go over there, 2 dead bulls, 2 dead bucks, whatever, right? So both those situations can arise. The other situation that arises is 4 guys with 4 cow elk tags jump out of a truck, unload their guns, and there's 5 dead elk. I've also seen that. Okay, so here's defense to this one, because you don't want it to happen to you, and I guarantee you there will be people that put comments down here that are like, yep, that happened to me. Yep, I remember that happening, because this is common and it can happen in the heat of the moment. But here's how you make sure it doesn't happen. If you're shooting at an animal in a controlled scenario with one shooter, regardless of how you feel the shot was, and regardless of what somebody else has told you about the shot, do not shoot your rifle again at a different animal. And make sure that that same animal that you now have in your scope is 100% guaranteed to be the same animal you originally shot at. If you are not 100%, do not shoot again. So never shoot at a different animal once you've started shooting at one, and do not even shoot at the same animal unless you are 100% sure it is the same animal. And the reason you have to be 100% sure, particularly with elk in the timber, is they go into the timber and then it looks like it's the same elk coming out the other stringer of the timber, but it turns out it's different elk a lot of the times. So you have to make sure it's the same animal. On the scenario where you have multiple shooters, and I could just say don't have multiple shooters, it's unsafe and there's too much of a chance of this kind of crap happening. That is the truth, but if I tell you that, most people are just going to ignore that. Particularly cow elk hunts, big opportunity comes, you got 40 cows running around in the snow and you've got two shooters, 2 tags, why not kill 2? I get it. What I recommend is a compromise. Have a shooter that shoots first and a backup shooter. Make sure you communicate clearly so you're shooting at the same elk. Once one elk is dead on the ground, you know it's down, then you can move to the next shooter depending on whose turn it is. This takes clear and concise communication, so you have to decide if you're capable of doing that or not. If you're not, then it should be 1 shooter up at a time per opportunity. I guarantee you, if you take the approach, we're gonna jump out, shoot as many until all of our tags are filled. If you have that kind of mindset, it's just a matter of time before this violation catches up to you. Any violations I didn't mention, stories, anecdotes, your opinions, leave them in the comments below so we can all get value from them. If you're looking for a more tactical video to prepare for this fall's elk hunt, go check out my wind and thermal video. I think you can get some value from it. If you got value from this video, do me a huge favor and like it and subscribe to the channel. That stuff helps me out a ton. Good luck out there, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.